during this introduction. Colleagues, dear friends, it is a pleasure and a privilege to address you this evening. This year, 2023, marks a significant landmark in the modern history of Sri Lanka. This year marks 75 years since Sri Lanka gained independence from colonial rule. In 1948, Ceylon, as it was known then, gained independence from the United Kingdom after nearly 450 years of foreign occupation. Importantly, for us in Washington, D.C., 2023 also marks 75 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations between Sri Lanka and the United States. So this is a very special year. Since then, the relationship has grown into one based on affinity of ideas and norms and mutual respect. Sri Lanka and the United States adhere to common values and principles: representative democracy, human security, human dignity, and the rule of law. This forms the basis for 75 years of cooperation, friendship, and open dialogue. Sri Lanka looks forward to building on this close relationship as it looks forward to the centenary of its independence and of its bilateral relations with the United States in 2048. 25 more years to go. It is fitting on significant anniversaries such as this to look back and take stock and to reflect on the past and attempt to learn from our experience. Recalling the past 50 years or so, I would like to highlight some key occurrences and events which have resulted in the contemporary situation faced by Sri Lanka. The first mass uprising in post-independence Ceylon was in 1971 by mainly southern youth who were inspired by Marxist ideology. The revolt began in April and lasted until June of that year. In 1987, the same group was to launch a low-intensity insurgency in the island's southern, central and western regions that lasted since till 1989. The JVP insurgents resorted to subversion, assassinations, raids, and attacks on military and civilian targets, while the Sri Lankan government reacted through counterinsurgency operations to suppress the revolt. Mass killings and disappearances, a near breakdown of civil administration, and severe adverse effects to the economy resulted. On the economic front, the major sea change in our approach to economic models was the transition, almost overnight, from a closed or command economy based on 2 decades of attempted self-reliance through industrialization aimed at import substitution to an open market-based economic model in 1977-78. In fact, Sri Lanka was the first country in South Asia to opt for an open economic free enterprise model. And it was, of course, a demonstration effect for other countries to follow suit. At the same time, welfare measures such as government investment in free education, up to university education, free health services, subsidization of agriculture and transport were continued to provide social safety nets to safeguard the vulnerable. This has helped us to maintain high human development indicators to this day despite economic difficulties. In fact, when one looks at the most recent UN Human Development Index that they publish every year, Sri Lanka leads South Asia in many spheres. So this is as a result of long-term investment that has taken place in provision of free education as well as universal health services. The tragic Black July incidents that began with a backlash by racist elements against the killing of 13 Sri Lankan army soldiers in the north of the country on the 23rd of July 1983 caused death and widespread destruction to property. The root cause was the cry for an independent Tamil homeland in the mainly Tamil-speaking north and east of the country. This independent entity was to be known as Tamil Eelam, a monoethnic state that would encompass huge swaths of territory and 2/3 of coastline of Sri Lanka. This is noted as the beginning of an intermittent terrorist insurgency against the Sri Lankan government by several militant groups, in particular the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, also known as the LTT, who gained the ascendancy over the other Tamil groups in the next decade or two. The battle against terrorists continued in 4 phases until the eventual military defeat of the LTT in 2009. The fallout of sporadic violence since the early 1970s led to a mass exodus of ethnic Tamil persons to India as well as Western countries, resulting in socio-political ramifications to this day. The events of 1983 were a black mark on the country as a whole, tarnishing our international image, severely affecting the economy and damaging the social fabric of a nation that has shown great potential for rapid advancement. Failed peace negotiations, initially in Thimphu, Bhutan, facilitated by India in 1985, resulted in intensified conflict which was sought to be addressed by Indian intervention by sending a peacekeeping force on the invitation of the government of Sri Lanka. The second southern insurrection coincided with the conclusion of the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord of 1987. The Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord was signed in Colombo in July 1987. This was when Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister of India. The accord was expected to resolve the Sri Lankan conflict by enabling the enactment of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of Sri Lanka and the Provincial Council Act of 1987. Actually, I started my political career with the establishment of the provincial councils in Sri Lanka, which was a power sharing arrangement, part of the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord, brokered by India, and it was power sharing from the center to the periphery. So I was a minister in the first provincial council that was established way back in 1987. Under the terms of the accord, Sri Lanka agreed to devolve power to the provinces. Sri Lankan troops were to be withdrawn to their barracks in the north, and Tamil terrorist groups were to surrender their arms. Significantly, the LTT initially agreed to surrender their arms symbolically to the Indian peacekeeping force, but with great reluctance. The LTT subsequently declared their intent to continue the armed struggle for an independent Tamil Eelam and refused to disarm. The IPKF, which is the Indian peacekeeping force, found itself engaged in a bloody conflict against the LTT. The result was that 1,200 Indian peacekeeping force soldiers were killed, and of course the subsequent assassination of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi by an LTT suicide bomber. The government of Sri Lanka requested the withdrawal of the IPKF in 1990. So they left in 1990, but 1,200 Indian soldiers were killed in the process. The succeeding years saw many attempts at peace negotiations with the LTT, which were unsuccessful. The general elections held on the 5th of December 2001 saw a sweeping victory for the party led by the present President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who had campaigned on a pro-peace platform and pledged to find a negotiated settlement to the conflict. The two sides formalized the Memorandum of Understanding on the 22nd of February 2002 and signed a permanent ceasefire agreement, we call it the CFA, that was brokered by the Norwegian government. The Norwegians were the facilitators that got the two sides to sit down and sign this ceasefire agreement. 6 rounds of negotiations were held at various locations outside Sri Lanka. The United States was one of the 4 co-chairs to this peace process. So you had the United States, you had the Norwegians, and you had the EU and Japan. Those were the 4 co-chairs to the peace process. So Eelam War 4, as we call it, was the name given to the final phase of the armed conflict between the Sri Lankan military and the separatist terrorist LTT. Renewed hostilities began on the 26th of July 2006 when the Sri Lankan Air Force took out several LTT camps around what we call the Mavilaru waterway, as the LTT had cut off the water supply to surrounding paddy fields in that area which is in the east of the country, affecting over 15,000 farmers. Fighting resumed after the 4-year ceasefire of the ceasefire agreement. Continued conflict led to victory for the Sri Lankan forces in the east by July 2007. So here I have a personal story to share with you. Almost exactly 16 years and 1 week ago, in late February 2007, I took 17 ambassadors, including the US ambassador at that time, Robert Blake, our friend, you must be knowing him, and we went with the UN, the resident representatives of a variety of UN humanitarian organizations which were operating out of Colombo. And our objective was to review progress of resettlement of the internally displaced persons in Batiklu in the east. As we disembarked from the helicopter, we couldn't even walk, say, 5 feet from the helicopter. The army yelled that we heard a sound, and the army yelled saying, "Mortars, run!" And all of us had to just run for our lives. And the mortars were landing everywhere in this huge stadium where the helicopter had landed. And unfortunately, the US ambassador who was with us was injured. He got shrapnel. So it's on the shrapnel lodged on his shoulder. But the Italian ambassador, who was also with us, had shrapnel lodged on the back of his head. And he had to be flown to Colombo immediately and to be operated on the same day. So that's the kind of dangerous conflict that was taking place at that time. They had no disregard, and they had no regard. The fact that 17 ambassadors were coming, not to act against it, but to help the people. And for them, everything was possible. The theater of conflict then shifted to the north. So soon after this eastern attack, the theater of conflict shifted to the north. Elam War 4 ended on the 18th of May 2009 with the Sri Lankan army gaining control of the last territory held by the LTT and with the death of the LTT leader. The end of the conflict posed significant challenges to the Sri Lankan state. Nearly 300,000 displaced civilians had to be resettled as a matter of priority. Over 12,500 ex-combatants had to be re-radicalized and rehabilitated. These are 12,500 cadre of the LTT who were wearing cyanide capsules around their neck and ready to die for the cause. So they had to be rehabilitated. 26 years of conflict had caused immense damage and destruction to physical and social infrastructure. Commencing in late 2009, two massive programs of reconstruction in the north and the east were initiated, along with extensive and challenging demining operations, mostly carried out by the Sri Lankan army, with foreign assistance. This was to facilitate resettlement. People had to be resettled in their traditional lands. Roads, railways, bridges, schools, hospitals and other civil infrastructure had to be restored. All these challenges we faced and overcame with a notable degree of success. These were the challenges we had to face after the 30-year conflict. The challenge of national reconciliation between the communities, distanced by years of conflict, was the next step in Sri Lanka's efforts at a permanent peace, paving the way for national unity and rapid and equitable development. Several commissions of inquiry were tasked with addressing issues both during and after the conflict. The international community, also prompted by the call for reconciliation and accountability by Sri Lankan diaspora groups especially, showed an increasing tendency to draw attention to the situation in Sri Lanka. In 2009, soon after the end of the conflict, in May, the United Nations Human Rights Council convened a special session on Sri Lanka. In fact, I led the Sri Lankan delegation for this special session, and there was a resolution that was carried with nearly 2/3 of the council voting in favor of the resolution, which was favorable to Sri Lanka. We were given an opportunity to build peace. We were given an opportunity there to show our commitment towards moving towards comprehensive reconciliation. This goodwill and understanding could have been leveraged into making substantial strides forward. As a result of lack of progress in these areas, for a variety of reasons, this momentum could not be maintained, and in 2012, a new resolution co-sponsored by the United States was adopted in the Council requiring expeditious action by Sri Lanka. I was there during that time as well, so I know how active Afrin, your side was in co-sponsoring this resolution, and you carried it through. Since then, Sri Lanka has been the subject of resolutions adopted by the Council in 2013, 2014, 2015, 2017, 2019, and 21 and 22. Now we are about to face another resolution. So we have been talking about revisiting the resolution and see how we can make more progress. For our part, we have in Sri Lanka undertaken many reforms in our constitutional and legal structures and are continuing with these efforts. In 2022, we reformed the Prevention of Terrorism Act. This was, we call it the PTA, which has been criticized as falling short of international standards. The government has recognized that a new counterterrorism law in keeping with international norms is a necessity. Legislation in this regard to replace the PTA has been drafted. The Cabinet of Sri Lanka has approved the publication of this bill, and the bill is being gazetted as we speak. So these are developments that occurred 2 weeks ago. Now it's being gazetted, and it's only a matter of time before this bill will be brought to Parliament, and we will have a new counterterrorism law that will be in line with international standards. The 21st Amendment to the Constitution was enacted, which ensures the independence of critical institutions, including the judiciary, the Office of the Attorney General, the Human Rights Commission, the Commission to investigate allegations of bribery or corruption, among other key institutions and officers. Sri Lanka will also debate a new anti-corruption law shortly, enabling more effective prevention, investigation and prosecution of corrupt practices. In fact, the Justice Minister, when I spoke to him last week, said that during the course of this month he hopes to present this new bill. So we'll have strong anti-corruption laws in addition to what we have at the moment, especially protection of whistleblowers and so on, that will be part of our statute books. Most importantly, an initiative has also commenced to establish a truth and reconciliation mechanism that will address and redress outstanding issues resulting from Sri Lanka's conflict. We are studying the South African model on truth and reconciliation. We are working with the South Africans very closely, and we are also looking at other experiences, best practices, such as Colombia, for example, so that we can borrow from all these experiences internationally, but of course, finally, develop a homegrown model which addresses the peculiarities of the Sri Lankan conflict. So, political negotiations have also been initiated by the President to consult political parties and groups towards evolving a durable political solution, including the implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. This is a power sharing arrangement that needs to be fully implemented, and the President has gone on record as saying that he is politically committed, his party is politically committed to implement this power sharing arrangement. Another important aspect of the current situation in Sri Lanka is, of course, the economic situation in the country. Gerard, something for you. As you know, Sri Lanka faced an unprecedented series of challenges in the recent past due to several factors. In April 2019, a group of suicide bombers targeted churches and hotels on one of the holiest days of the Christian calendar, Easter Sunday. This is called the Easter Sunday Massacre. This resulted in nearly 270 deaths, including 5 American citizens. 5 American citizens who were holidaying in Sri Lanka at the time were killed as a result of this indiscriminate bombing, suicide bombing. This tragic occurrence dealt a body blow to tourism, one of the mainstays of the economy and a critically important foreign exchange earner for Sri Lanka. Next, from 2020, Sri Lanka has been faced with a devastating COVID-19 pandemic which caused the economy to contract even further, severely disrupting local economic activity. Agricultural output fell drastically due to a misconceived policy of totally banning chemical fertilizer and agrochemicals overnight in favor of organic fertilizers. No country has ever adopted 100% organic fertilizer practice. No country. I did some research and I found that the country which uses the highest amount of organic fertilizer is Australia. And Australia uses only 17%. Sri Lanka tried to do it overnight. This posed numerous problems to food security and nutritional levels, especially among the young. Partly due to the pandemic, worker remittances also dropped to record lows. The conflict in Ukraine and the global economic downturn has only served to exacerbate the problems posed in Sri Lanka. Moreover, poor economic management and political interference in administrative matters and allegations of corruption are seen as causative factors. So, Easter Sunday bombing, the Ukraine war, COVID-19, all that, plus allegations of corruption. The mounting debt burden over the years made Sri Lanka's external debt unsustainable. Hence, by May 2022, Sri Lanka had, for the first time since its independence, defaulted on its debt repayments. It is interesting to note that it was an American, this is interesting, I'm sure Gerald, you didn't know this, an American called John Exter. John Exter was a leading economist at the Federal Reserve. And he was loaned by the Federal Reserve in 1949 to help Sri Lanka to draw our monetary policy. And John Exter not only did the job, but he did such a good job that they asked him to be the first governor of the Central Bank of Ceylon. Can you believe that? America, from the Federal Reserve, was made the first governor of the Central Bank of Ceylon. So, now you have to help us. Our recent, of course, very recently, just a couple of days ago in fact, Cabinet has approved a new Central Bank Act to bolster central bank autonomy, and its crisis management powers have been strengthened. An independent central bank, as you know, as all of you know, is vital for sound monetary policy of any country. Our recent difficulties resulted in numerous shortages, including medical supplies, fuel for transport, domestic and commercial food production, other essential consumer goods, Sri Lanka faced a dearth of these vital goods and services, compounded by record inflation and a sharp depreciation of the rupee. Foreign inward remittances dwindled to a trickle, and foreign exchange reserves were drastically reduced. The resulting social unrest, principally led by youth, but also involving many segments of the population, caused the ouster of the President, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Finance. This was given by publicity in the international media. Sri Lanka's path to recovery will take time, will involve hardship and resolve. Some tough economic reform measures are being taken as we speak and will be endured, however painful. President Wickremesinghe has repeatedly assured the people and our international partners that the government of Sri Lanka has the will and commitment to undertake these urgent remedial measures. Sri Lanka looks to its bilateral and multilateral partners for understanding, goodwill and support in its reform initiatives. We greatly appreciate the advice and assistance of the IMF and the World Bank and look forward to working with them in a spirit of openness and close cooperation. To our creditors, we ask for their cooperation and assistance in ensuring that debt sustainability is achieved through debt restructuring arrangements that will be emplaced with a high degree of transparency and equal treatment to all. No backroom deals, everyone will be treated equally. We will take ownership of the IMF program and ensure its implementation. We are on the verge of obtaining approval for the IMF program. It could be any day now. I know the day, but I'm going to tell you. It will happen soon. During the past few decades, during various stages of his attempts to deal with these challenges, Sri Lanka has been assisted by inflows of generous aid and development cooperation from the United States. We're very grateful. Just as an example, let me take the COVID-19 pandemic. The United States donated over 3.4 million doses of vaccines. It was the donation. Provided ventilators. Key personal protective equipment were given. Ultra cold chain storage facilities and diagnostic equipment was given by the US. All these were donations. All this enables Sri Lanka to reach a high level of vaccination of over 85%. And as a result, we were by and large able to protect our citizens from the worst effects of the pandemic. We have had two visits of two of our heads of state, the US, state level visits. One was when President Jayawardena was invited during President Reagan's time to the White House. He bought an elephant with him, a baby elephant. And it was ironic that the symbol of the Republican Party and the symbol of his party were both elephants. So President Reagan, of course, was very happy. And we also had a visit of the present president when he was invited as Prime Minister by President George W. Bush to the White House. So those were the two visits, and I'm working with Afrin. I'm sure she wouldn't mind if I say this publicly, to see whether we can, given the 75 years, whether we can have a, maybe not to the White House, but maybe a meeting between President Biden and President Wickremesinghe when they both attend the UN General Assembly in September. And we are hopeful that that will happen. Our trade relationship remains, I'm sorry, I'm not putting you in a spot. Our trade relationship remains vibrant and strong. The United States has been #1 export destination of Sri Lanka, constituting 26% of Sri Lanka's total exports to the world. This is the largest market for Sri Lankan exports. 26% of our exports come here. And you are the 6th import partner of Sri Lanka. 6th largest import partner of Sri Lanka. We look to renewed US interest in investing in green energy and climate resilience, among other key areas going forward. Commencing with initiatives under the PL 480 program during the last century, we acknowledge with gratitude and continued assistance from the United States in guaranteeing recovery in the agricultural sector during the present difficulties. During the past year alone, assistance in the provision of fertilizer, seed material and nutritional supplements through USA. We have Mr. Young here with us. Thank you for coming. From USA, has been of critical importance to Sri Lanka. Total United States assistance in the past year has accounted to US $270 million. Over 30 years ago, USA technical assistance helped raise the Colombo Stock Exchange to an international level. 30 years ago. Just this morning, Secretary Janet Yellen called our president. There was a brief conversation. I was briefed by the president soon after the telephone conversation, and the president was very happy about the conversation that took place. And I was told that Secretary Janet Yellen had assured continued US support for Sri Lanka. In fact, the US Treasury has been consistently supporting us in the past year in ensuring that Sri Lanka gets this IMF Extended Fund Facility, the EFF as we call it. I've been meeting Robert, Gerard and others regularly, and I must say that your support was really a clincher for Sri Lanka to come this far. Thank you for the understanding. On a separate note, I have also reached out beyond the US government structure, and our embassy is working closely with US non-governmental organizations like Heart to Heart, Hope International, AmeriCares, and our embassy has been able to, as a result of reaching out to these non-governmental organizations, in the last 6 months, we have been able to send $27 million of life-saving medicines to Sri Lanka. $27 million. This is outside the US government structure. This is from these non-governmental organizations who have come to the assistance of Sri Lanka. Just recounting the various facets of the Sri Lankan relationship with the United States over the past 7.5 decades, be it in the sphere of disaster preparedness and relief, military and security cooperation through the provision of equipment and training, including 2 Coast Guard cutters for marine domain awareness, collaboration on matters pertaining to reconciliation, education, the scores of Sri Lankans who have migrated to the United States and have contributed in various ways to US society and the economy, ongoing cultural exchange through person-to-person contact, and socio-cultural exchange programs. All this would be futile in and of itself, as those present here in this room would readily acknowledge the deep and abiding rapport between our 2 countries. We are also very appreciative of the openness and facilitation provided at federal and state levels to establish Buddhist temples in different parts of the US so that devotees are given the opportunity to worship, meditate and engage in spiritual observances. So this says to all the openness of the society, the tolerance of other religions, the multicultural, multi-religious fabric of a society. This year we hope to celebrate the contributions in the revival of Buddhism of Colonel Henry Steele Olcott. I don't know whether any of you have heard of, you have. He was co-founder of the Theosophical Society. He was also one of the lawyers that were engaged in looking into the assassination of President Lincoln. He was working out of New York, from New Jersey, and he spent time in Pittsburgh subsequently. A distinguished American who went to Sri Lanka and helped to revive Buddhism during British rule. There are roads named after him, this great American. There are schools named after him. And he's celebrated every year, and we're celebrating him this year as well. The Sri Lankan Embassy having a symposium. And there's another distinguished American. I don't know whether any of you have heard of Ananda Kumar Swami. Ananda Kumar Swami is Tamil, of Tamil origin, and he was a erudite Sri Lankan scholar. And he was actually the curator of the Boston Museum for 16 years. And he is regarded as a person who really popularized Indian art to the West. And the Boston Museum contacted me and wanted to do something for him, to remember him. And we are in the fall. We are doing a symposium, collaborating with, working with the Boston Museum to commemorate Ananda Kumar Swami's contribution. The role of American missionaries 200 years ago also has to be remembered. They went to Sri Lanka, they established schools, hospitals, and this is something that is talked even today. And their activities were mainly in the north of the country. On this occasion, a more productive exercise would be to ask where we can take this friendship in the next 25 years and beyond. What are the prospects for the next stage of our partnership? How can we benefit from our ties and mutual experience? I would like to leave you with these concluding thoughts. As we meet today, celebrating 75 years of a close and productive friendship, looking forward to 2048 and 100 years of partnership, what should our expectations be? We as a small island nation, situated in a strategic geographic location, have much to offer and to gain by maintaining friendly relations with the entirety of the international community. While we especially value our relations with nations in the South Asian region, sub-region, especially our closest neighbor India, we also wish to have close and harmonious relations with all countries. We are conscious of our positioning and our relevance to the United States Indo-Pacific strategy. We look towards engaging with the four-nation quadrilateral security dialogue (QUAD) as an interested nation. We look to enhance our maritime surveillance capacities and would value continued United States support in combating drug and human trafficking in the region. In aiding our recovery, we would welcome United States tourists to come and enjoy the many wonders of the pearl of the Indian Ocean. Elizabeth is already ready to book a ticket to Sri Lanka. We have much to offer in terms of ecotourism and wellness, in addition to world-class beaches, stunning landscapes and wildlife. Our 2,500 years of living history may be witnessed even today by visiting a number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. So, you got your trip full of activity. We hope, as a country vulnerable to climate change, to forge closer ties with the United States in fostering research and learning on the subject in the sub-region and beyond. Our President's vision to establish a university for climate study, research and training based in Sri Lanka and serving the Indian Ocean region, hopefully supplemented by United States support, would benefit a large segment of humankind. We already discussed it with the Special Representative's Office, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to work together on this brilliant idea. We look forward to engaging in an ongoing dialogue with the United States on a range of governance-related issues, reconciliation initiatives, human rights, anti-corruption, legislative oversight of executive functions, democratization, legal and judicial sector reform, so that we can meet the objectives of Sustainable Development Goal SDG 16, to strengthen our institutions and guarantee a better future for all Sri Lankans. I have been able to meet and brief around 50 senators and congressmen in the last 14 months of me being the ambassador from both sides of the divide. And most of these 50 whom I have met, senators and congressmen, are members of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Appropriation Committee. So these are influential legislators, key people on both sides. And we have briefed them on the steps being taken towards achieving comprehensive reconciliation, the rule of law, strengthening the rule of law, strengthening democracy, lasting peace, in addition to steps taken to overcome the surmountable economic challenges. I will continue this outreach. Finally, our goal is to work with the United States and other international partners to assure a more just, a more equitable international order that will enable the fulfillment of our potential as a small but proud and sovereign nation that guarantees the well-being and future of our people. I trust that our engagement at the bilateral level can only strengthen this effort. I'm sorry if I took too long, but thank you very much for listening.
You mentioned in your comments about the difficulties, the economic difficulties last year, and also recently because of the war in Ukraine. How is the situation now for the average citizens in Europe?
Well, that's a very relevant question, Nazir. Situation is definitely improved from what it was 1 year ago. And as I mentioned in my speech, we are hopeful of getting approval very soon on the extended fund facility of the IMF. That will create a demonstration effect for the World Bank and the ADB and others to also put down the bridging finance that is needed to tie us over until the reforms kick in. So tough decisions have been taken, unpopular political decisions have had to be taken, but we had to do that to get out of the rut that we have fallen into. So there's very strong political commitment to go the full distance. President himself has gone on record as saying that he's fully committed to implementing the program, and the fundamentals are there in Sri Lanka. Of course, we need to now restructure the debt, and as I mentioned, it's the first time that Sri Lanka had to default. It has never happened in the history, and we don't like it. We want to get back so that we can pay our creditors and continue the development that needs to be put into place to usher in prosperity for Sri Lankans. So I see a very positive future. A very good future for Sri Lanka, because we have a leader who's understood the problem, and we are in the process of taking those decisions that need to be taken to restructure the economy, to get back to where we were and even to a better position.
All right, thank you very much. In your comments, you had mentioned about the terrible civil war, and you also had mentioned there are some laws about, there's some process about the reconciliation and deal. Can you talk about how is that process going, actually, in addition to the legal and the other steps that are taken? How are the communities, are they coming together in that area?
Well, there's a lot of work to be done there. One of the objectives that I have set for this year, for myself as well as for the embassy, is to reach out to the diaspora in the US. There's a large, diaspora here. Not only the majority Sinhalese, but also the Tamils and Muslims who live here. And I want to reach out to them. I want to update them on what is happening in terms of what we're doing, the steps that are being taken to move towards comprehensive reconciliation. I want to establish a dialogue with them. Because some of these congressmen and senators, I won't mention names, whom I have been meeting, always tell me, Ambassador, thank you for coming and explaining to me all what you are doing, but please, some of my constituents are on my back all the time, giving me all kinds of notes, messages. Explain to them, I'm impressed with what you're doing, but then the message has to go to them as well. So we have just established an overseas Sri Lanka desk at the Foreign Ministry, and we have appointed Director General there. And that office will be reaching out from Colombo to the diaspora in mostly the Western countries. Now, for example, Canada has nearly 500,000, and Tamil diaspora members, and they are citizens of Canada, and they enjoy the right to vote. So naturally, legislators, policymakers listen to them. But we need to have a dialogue with them and explain to them the steps that are being taken. And my experience, long experience of handling this kind of subject is that, on the surface we might say, there's no point talking to these people because they are very anti Sri Lanka and anti what we are doing. No way that we can get through to them. But what I have found is that once we sit down and once we start talking, it's remarkable that there's somewhere that some common ground can be identified, and that common ground can be built on. And this is what I want to do.
Great, thank you so much.
So I'm going to reach out to them.
Great. So my last question would be, before I let others, I'll ask, and there are 2 microphones over here. What is one thing that you would like people to know about Sri Lanka that is generally not known or not covered by the media? Is there something that you...
Well, we are a very friendly nation. You go to Sri Lanka, you'll see everyone with a smile. They greet you with a broad smile. That is in our culture, that is in our DNA. They're very hospitable. It's a beautiful country. People are very generous towards outsiders, foreigners who come and visit Sri Lanka. And people who have come to Sri Lanka always come back because of this. Apart from the fact that the country in itself is a beautiful country to visit, there's so much that someone going to Sri Lanka can also take back. As much as Sri Lankans coming to countries like this can also take back. So, I was telling Elizabeth, don't worry about the visa, I will guarantee the visa. That will be given over the table. So, any one of you, please reach out to us, we'll facilitate going to Sri Lanka. It's not that hard to get there either, there's good connections. The connection that I usually take is from Dallas to Doha, Qatar, and then from there a direct flight to Colombo. So you gain 10 hours when you go there to Sri Lanka. When you come back, you have that 10-hour advantage. Please do come and visit Sri Lanka, and I'm sure you'll enjoy.
Well, you mentioned hospitality, and both Elizabeth and myself are recipients of the hospitality we received at our residence, and so thank you very much. Now I'll ask there are two microphones on each side, so please feel free to ask questions.
May we use this mic if it works?
Sure. That's fine.
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador, for giving us an introduction to your country, and I look forward to visiting. I'm a historian and also a collector. I would love a copy or to see the agreement that your country made with the Chinese in terms of its loans. Is that something that would be possible?
Well,
just a historical artifact of lending practices.
yes. I'm sure after the EFF is given, it will be in the public domain. Of course, there's no agreement that we have made with them. It's a letter that they have sent to us.
I see.
In line with other creditors. So that was received today in Colombo, and it has been communicated to the IMF, and that they were waiting for that letter to go before the IMF board. So we are hopeful that it will happen soon. But I'm sorry, I'm not at liberty to give you this letter, but I'm sure after the approval is given, it will, I'm sure.
So
it is public domain.
Just to understand, the original letter of agreement with the Chinese lenders years ago, that's a different document, or?
Yeah, that's of course on the basis of applying and getting the loan.
Yes.
The agreement that was with the Export-Import Exim Bank of China, who was the lender, who was the creditor. But this is for debt restructuring.
Yes. Yeah, that's something that would be of less interest to me.
I'm sure it
more of a historian like this in the past. Thank you.
But keep an eye open for Bloomberg or some media outlet like that.
Every morning.
Hold up the letters.
Every morning. Thank you.
Well, if I could ask a follow-up to the question, the matter that Randy Lieberman alluded to. I was really blown away how excellent your talk was on the Tamil-Sinhalese relations over recent years and on U.S. relations. Could you speak about relations of China over the last couple of decades with your country?
Well, China also has been a friend of Sri Lanka. As I mentioned, we are a small country, and we want to get along well with everyone. And of course, our emphasis is more towards the South Asian neighbors, to work with them as much as possible, especially India, who's our closest neighbor. But we want to reach out to everyone and work with everyone. especially the US.
Just take an opportunity to mention you had asked about something of interest about Sri Lanka that people may not know. I find it interesting that many people will probably know this, but many will not. I think that there have been a number of names for Sri Lanka over the years. Ceylon, coming from the Dutch, and also the ancient Arabic word for Sri Lanka was Serendip. And it is from that name that we get the word serendipity, a wonderful, unexpected discovery.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Next time I'll send the draft of my speech to you.
My name is Mahinda Samarasinghe. I have a question. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for giving us a type of commentary of Sri Lanka. And I wish I was living in that country, because I was in Sri Lanka in October for the whole of month, and in February the whole of month, and I just came back. And that is not the country that I saw in terms of the turmoil in the country. So I know this is not the forum for us to talk about that. But I would like to take one of the comments that you made. You said, we are trying to restructure the economy. And I'm very interested in that, because what I saw in Sri Lanka all this time was the fact that we are trying to restructure the debt. I think it is very important that we should restructure debt. But that's after the debt what? You see, do we have a vision to make the economy restructured so that we can take off? I'm asking this question because of the fact that I'm interested in three of the main foreign exchange earners. The housemaids, much maligned housemaids, especially by the parliamentarians who are going in their Mercedes from the earnings from the maids. And number two is the garment industry, which is 70% value added, you see, and the imports are very expensive now. And we are meeting competition from Bangladesh. And number three is the tea industry, with the fertilizer prices is going down. So that is our main foreign exchange earner. And I'm wondering what the vision is in terms of restructuring the economy, especially as I see a lot of young people immigrating. That's the resource that we have. And if you look at the passport office, you see how people are going in droves to other countries. So could you tell us a little bit about what type of things are we restructuring in terms of trying to get the economy in line with what we aim to have in increased productivity? Thank you.
Thank you. Although she has the same surname as mine, she's not a relative of mine. Thank you for that question. Yeah, well, you know, first of all, Sri Lanka, this government is committed towards private sector-led growth strategy. We have identified the private sector as the main engine of growth, and we will do whatever is needed to facilitate the private sector, which has proven, even during the long drawn-out conflict with the LTT, to be resilient. They have gone out and got markets. For example, I said 26% of Sri Lanka's exports come to the US market. Bulk of these exports are ready-made garments. And even during the long drawn-out conflict, these private sector operators were able to come to the US, make agreements with your buyers here, and supply them consistently. And they are the real heroes of the economic growth that Sri Lanka was able to achieve, even during this long drawn-out conflict. So, private sector is the main engine of growth. We are also restructuring the economy in terms of ensuring that the budget deficit is in a manageable proportion. The budget deficit is way out of proportion, at the moment. We can't continue to print money and borrow internationally to bridge the deficit. So expenditure has to be in line with revenue. So very strong revenue measures are being put into place. Some of the state-owned enterprises which have been top-heavy over the years, there has been political interference in the running of those state-owned enterprises, such as the petroleum state outfit, the electricity which is state outfit, which is a monopoly of government. They have been, subject to political interference. Political patronage has been exercised. They are top-heavy, as I mentioned earlier. So we need to restructure those state-owned enterprises. Sri Lankan Airlines has been depending on the Sri Lankan Treasury for bailouts year by year, year after year. We can't continue to do that. That has to be restructured. So we have earmarked some of these state-owned enterprises that are going to be restructured, and it could be restructured on the basis of public-private partnership model, or maybe even outright privatization. So that's a decision that the politicians have to take, but what is clear is that the Treasury cannot continue to bankroll them. We just can't afford to do that. They have to stand on their own 2 feet, and we are committed to doing that. Import substitution, to some extent, we are conscious of food security. A country like Sri Lanka, or any country for that matter, needs to bear in mind the importance of food security. So we need to strengthen the agricultural sector. Of course, we operate on the basis of comparative advantage. We don't want to continue to subsidize. We can't afford to continue to subsidize, even in those areas. So we need to, ensure that higher productivity levels are achieved, so that on the basis of comparative advantage, import substitution can also take place. You mentioned the foreign labor. By the way, we have a large segment of Sri Lankan population working mainly in the Middle East, and they send their earnings back to Sri Lanka. So that was affected as a result of the pandemic, but is now slowly going back to what it was. So that will ensure that the international reserves position will be strengthened, and with the international reserves position being strengthened, the rupee will have the opportunity of being able to stabilize more. In the last week or so, the rupee has started appreciating as a result of the tough economic reforms that are now being put into place. The market is confident that we are going on the right track. So with the announcement of the IMF package, there will be a more positive demonstration effect taking place, and the rupee, we hope, will appreciate further, and that is the only solution to combating inflation. And of course, increase in production domestically. The other area, of course, is a dynamic export-led growth strategy. We are at the moment dependent too much on ready-made garment exports. That's bulk of the foreign exchange earnings. Of course, tea traditionally has been there and it's still there, but we want to diversify into new areas. So these are also now being identified, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to market it internationally, so that foreign direct investment can be brought into Sri Lanka. Combating inflation would mean, of course, in a classic sense, to increase interest rates, but of course when you increase interest rates, you have a negative effect for domestic investment opportunities. So naturally we don't, even in the US, you are experiencing that with rate increases. But once the economy gets back on the correct footing, I think things will start improving. So those are in a nutshell some of the reforms. Tourism, of course, is another area that we want to promote. Good news is that I've been told Sri Lanka that tourists are coming back now. Tourists are coming back, hotels are now getting filled up, and that's very good news. Of course, we are not still in the pre-COVID era, but we're getting there. So all these things will come into place, and hopefully we'll see better results.
Well, please join me in thanking Ambassador Mahinda Samarasinghe.
I'm sorry it took a bit longer. Hi, my name is Mahinda Samarasinghe. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a Sri Lankan American, and I think just looking at the dichotomy between the two, right? America also has politicians who have been in power for 40, 30 years. I currently work for the Democratic Party, and we've elected our first Generation Z. We've had a lot of representation. So I know under UNP, right, when Ranil Wickremesinghe took over, we saw a lot of the diaspora communities, humanitarian aid coming back to Sri Lanka after it had been withdrawn for a long time. So now after this most current revolution, what is currently being done or to diversify representation of parliament or representation or mentorship to younger generations to have more of this, this next generation to kind of take over in terms of, our political, socio-political, this new generation that we're kind of going into, this next chapter of Sri Lanka for the next 25 years, right? Because we're looking at, our president is currently 81 years old, Ranil Wickremesinghe is probably close to 80 as well. So we're looking at, what is going to be happening to kind of lead this next generation of politicians to lead Sri Lanka into the next 25 years?
Yeah. That's a very good question. But first of all, when you look at the representation in Parliament, the gender representation in Parliament, although Sri Lanka boasts that we produced the first female Prime Minister in the world, our female representation percentage in Parliament is one of the lowest in South Asia as well as compared to other countries. So we need to encourage more women to come into politics, either through political parties taking a stand and saying certain percentage of candidates must be females, or like what Bangladesh did, bring a law and say, there has to be a certain percentage of women elected and sitting in parliament. So this is a priority area for the present president. He wants to do that. Youth definitely need to, I fully agree with you. There has to be a second run, third run. Political parties must pay attention to that need. We saw when the demonstrations took place that it was young people who took to the streets, and what was fantastic to see was that it transcended political barriers, it transcended ethnicity, it transcended religion. They all came together. It was a young people's movement that took to the streets and demanded the ouster of the previous president and some others. So these young people are also yearning to be a part of the policy-making apparatus in Sri Lanka. So we need to find a way for them to come in and play a role. Because in any country there needs to be conscious thinking of building a second and a third run. So President has reached out to those young people who came out and demonstrated. He has invited them to partake in policy-making forums, and we are hopeful that the next elections, that they will also seek nominations from political parties, or maybe they will band together and be a new movement seeking to take over the future of Sri Lanka. But definitely, I fully agree with you. There has to be a system change, so to speak.
So thank you very much. And with this, Please join me in thanking Ambassador Mahinda Samarasinghe.